say to live is to suffer, and you'll figure it out. Yeah. Siddhartha's going to figure it out, Siddhartha. So we'll try to figure it out. All right, I think this is where we left off yesterday. Watched a little clip thing, and then some things while you're reading, and not that you have to write all of this stuff down. You don't have to write any of it down, but just kind of a little reminder of some things. Especially with like the first part, you want to kind of relate the events in each chapter with Siddhartha's success or failure at trying to accomplish each step of the Eightfold Path. And it's not that he's going to do things where, okay, I have to make sure that I have, right speech, right conduct, right mindfulness, and all those kinds of things. But certainly that Buddhism idea is a framework of the novel that Hess is trying to incorporate. So the idea is that Siddhartha will maybe do some things along that Eightfold Path. There's also no coincidence that he has his title character being the same name as the person who is the enlightened one, the original Buddha, because the idea would mean that, okay, he's going to be someone who would be capable of trying to figure such things out. He is, I would say, using Buddhism as a framework for the novel, but that doesn't mean that's the only way that you can go about things. There's going to be certainly some elements of Hinduism, Buddhism, and even Christianity, certainly as you get towards the end of the book. So in a lot of ways, it's not simply just, here's the way that you have to do things, but there could be a different path for different people in order to try to find what is going to be that answer in life for you. But there's certainly going to be some contrast between the strictness of Hinduism and then more of like those kind of straightforward steps that take place with Buddhism throughout the course of the book. But again, there's not one of those things that he's certainly trying to emphasize over the other. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a mishmash where Hess's quote-unquote religion presented in the book is going to be a combination of all of these things, and it's primarily kind of up to you to decide what's going to work best. So you shouldn't really read the book going, okay, he wants me to be Hindu, he wants me to be Buddhist, he wants me to be Christian, he wants me to be something else. He wants you to see that there's many ways in which Ethan can get to some kind of enlightenment, and that could be different from the way that Alex is going to get there, and it'll be different from my correct way of getting there, as opposed to their incorrect way. I'm not going to tell you when I figure it out. So, I know it has nothing to do with your presentation, but I have to do it later. So I'm steering clear of that. Okay. As long as you're consistent. He makes a lot of money come Christmas time when they sell those little toy trucks. They're very popular. You don't know the Hess toy trucks? They're collectibles. You could be a millionaire if you have them all and unboxed. I mean, currently boxed, unopened. Actually, that Hess doesn't have any on there, though. But... All right, I'm going to give you some names of some folks that are going on throughout the course of the novel and let you know some significance with them. Siddhartha, I already mentioned that this is going to be title character. Literally means he who attains his goal. So this would be quite the failure if Siddhartha does not attain his goal. You're not going to be living up to what your namesake is. Morgan, what's Morgan mean? So you have no meaning? That's too bad. I'm a gift. John. But, yeah. John's gift. Yep. Gift from God. How about that? You're welcome. Sean also means gift from God. Yeah. Well, he has some time. So Siddhartha, he who attains his goal, mentioned, purposely going to be named after Gautama Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, who he does meet, the founder of Buddhism, certainly going to be the protagonist, hero of the novel, who's going to be main character. There is a Bollywood film version of Siddhartha that I think got done in like the 70s, so that's where some of the pictures are kind of coming from. Was re-released on Netflix a couple years ago. I don't think it's there anymore, so Libby, sorry. Not do the independent reading essay because it'll be done Thursday night. There you go.
Unless you decide to hypothetically switch.
No, I think that's going to be my announcement at the beginning of each class. Like, if you hypothetically want to switch your book, don't talk to me.
Please do. Please.
Govinda. So, Siddhartha and Govinda are buddies. Govinda is around a good bit in part 1, and then he kind of disappears, but he's always coming back, which can be a sign of a good friend. It also can be a sign of an annoying friend or acquaintance. But yeah, Govinda literally means keeper of the cows, and then cows, as well as like a lot of other animals, are very sacred in Hinduism, because the idea in Hinduism, anything that has life is important and is sacred and really should not be harmed. And so that's where you'll have, the idea about why you shouldn't eat beef or pork or things like that. It's a living creature. It's something that, has meaning and significance in it. So a traditional Hindu diet is going to be, pretty much vegetarian. Now, there has been some change with that depending upon where you live with culture. But literally means keeper of the cows, which would have a sacred connotation to it. So it would be interpreted that it would be like a religious calling that would kind of come his way, whether it be as a monk, as a Brahmin, as a priest. He is a Brahmin so far as his caste system, so it's close childhood friend. They would be pretty much equal so far as age, so far as rank, and things like that. I'd say Govinda ends up being a little bit more of like a static character. He kind of is what he is, and he never really changes a whole lot. And I think for some people that can be a little, annoying in some ways. What it does help do is, since he does not change, should Siddhartha change in any kind of way, you kind of get a better way of seeing what that contrast is between those two. A lot of times throughout the book, Govinda is also going to have the idea of being Siddhartha's shadow. So, you kind of picture the kid who's always like just 2 steps behind you. That Govinda is always just kind of following him along and whatnot. But Siddhartha's not going, get away from me, move on. But Govinda certainly looks up to Siddhartha quite a bit. Do you follow Izza, or does Izza follow you? Since she's not here, she certainly didn't follow you. Exactly. You're figuring this out. This is good. Gautama Buddha, founder of Buddhism, profound positive effect on Siddhartha's search for meaning. He has a pretty limited role that's going to show up in part number 1. After part number 1, he's not going to be there anymore. Historically, if you were taking a look at contemporaries and whatnot, the Buddha, Confucius, they would be contemporaries of one another, or at least pretty similar, both in like that 5th, 6th century BCE, before Common Era. Certainly not two people who would have, have met one another at that point. But historically, that would be roughly where we would be. And some characters, so all those folks are going to be part 1. You're not going to meet Kamala or Kamaswami or Vasudeva until part number 2, but good to go over a couple things with them. Kamala means lotus blossom. Those of you reading Gatsby would be like Daisy, Daisy being a flower, or if you have a character named Violet, flower. So it certainly has feminine quality to it. Represents physical love, serves as Siddhartha's lover later on in part number 2. Not really giving anything away at this point, so you don't have to worry about that. But certainly she brings about a different side to Siddhartha than what we would be able to kind of see early on when he is still just a young Brahmin in part number 1. Part number 1, you're going to notice there are some jumps in time. It's going to be about a 3-4 year period that you're going to see in part number 1 so far as the duration. And then part number 2, there's going to be some significant leaps that are going to take place for 10 years later, 15 years kind of later. So time will get manipulated a little bit. It's not that you're dealing with a 120-page book that's just going to cover like 2 or 3 days of a person's life, but it's going to be years upon years upon years. Kamaswami. Say that 10 times, Morgan. Why do you get softer each time you say it? Like, Grace was enjoying this. Broadcast it. Has this combination of love, desire, passion, along with owner, master. So he is a merchant. This idea that there is going to be something that can basically kind of consume you where money, the desire for money, business, things like that, becomes the master of who he is as a person. So he has more of that materialism, consumerism kind of aspect role to him that he would portray. Just like Govinda tends to be very much a static character where he is what he is, and there's not going to be a whole lot of change or deviation from that's going to take place. But certainly someone who would be of the merchant class within that whole caste system that we're taking a look at. Make sure you spell the names right on the reading check quiz, Virginia.
What?
Make sure you spell the names right on the reading check quiz.
Oh, okay. I'm not gonna be able to do that. I'm really bad at spelling and names, so it's really bad combination.
I hope your pictures are detailed so that we can tell who's who. Oh. Vasudeva, this is the guy I like in the book. One who abides in all things and in whom all things abide. Think about that, Shay. The heck does that mean?
If you like, if you live in everything, everything lives in you.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad. Yeah. He's a little bit of like a godlike figure, or at least deity. And when we say like God figure, not meaning like supreme God or whatnot, but there is a deity kind of aspect to him. He lives by the river. He just takes people across the river. That's all he does. He has this little ferry and just, will take you from A side to B side to A side, back and forth, back and forth. He's going to have a much more prominent role, obviously, as we get into part number 2. But he is someone who kind of takes on that mentor figure for Siddhartha to help him try to realize the meaning of Om, the meaning of his existence of life, and maybe even not necessarily the overall meaning of his life, but at least to come to some peace with it. So he does have that deity-like quality, mentor quality that is going to help him come to some realizations about who he is and who he is meant to be and whatnot. So Vasudeva. So Kamaswami, Kamala, Vasudeva, Govinda would all be people that Siddhartha is going to be going with. Meeting around. The nice thing is really from a name standpoint, those are your main ones. You're not going to have 20, 30 characters that you're going to have to try to keep straight with it, which after coming from Cuckoo's Nest, when you had the names of all the patients and whatnot, I think it does help keep things pretty straight and nice and tidy for you. And then last thing, Om, not a character, but certainly an important component that's going to be within the book. Om is that word where you're totally absorbed in your meditation, that it's going to help you if you are able to get to the chant of Om, to hopefully reach nirvana, where there is that nothingness and those outside influences do not matter. So the hope would be that this is going to bring peace and certainly give you a sense of calm where you are able to get into that nothingness. And again, with nirvana being nothingness, the idea that there is not anything around you that is going to affect you negatively. There's not anything around you that's going to be causing stress. There's not anything around you that is going to be taking you away from being at that peaceful moment, peaceful existence that you would be looking for. I heard water and then I didn't hear it. Water's everywhere. Water's everywhere and only at one place at the same time. Sure. Go down the river. That's not real water. That's fake water. That's not natural water. Go down to the river. The river, or like little creek. What does the water do? It flows. So the water is always there. But the water that you're looking at right now is not going to be there anymore because it's going to be someplace else. That's true.
But see, that can't be true because there's only so much water in this world. It has to come back around. It's like you probably
Precipitation, water cycle.
You probably touch the same water.
When I mentioned 31 levels of existence, you should have seen the face on Douglas Bench where it was like, "What is going on? This is too crazy." It was a good moment. Morgan's going to have that same thing the next time you step in water. Anyone ever have deja vu?
Yes. I kind of like it.
If why do you like deja vu?
Because I know it's gonna happen.
Arguments would be made that if that, and I don't think I've ever really experienced like authentic deja vu where I haven't been here but I feel like I have before. People would go that would be something that would support the idea of like a rebirth or a reincarnation that then I have been here before but I know I haven't or I've met this person. That it could be a different soul or not a different soul but it could have been like a different vessel that your soul did meet that person in. For the scientific folks, fourth dimension is the manipulation of time. So, we live in a three-dimensional world. If you can see in four dimensions, you can see time at different levels, and that would also kind of go with like a rebirth, reincarnation concept. So, a lot of these things, they're getting talked about and presented, 3,000 years ago. There's certainly still conversations that are being had about it where, hey, if Shay goes through that black hole and she's in her parallel universe that we don't know of, it would be similar to that kind of reincarnation, rebirth that would be happening. But deja vu, the idea that you have done something or you've been somewhere, you've met someone, but you really, in your lifetime have not seen them before or been there before. A lot of folks look at the idea that maybe it does open up that possibility that there could be some kind of rebirth that does take place for the soul. Hermann Hesse. He's German writer, so when the book does get published, it would be written in German. So we're taking a look at a translation. So there are some nuances that are a little bit different, between your translation of the book, the hard copy versus the paperback and all this stuff. He's born in Germany in 1877. I'm not worried about you knowing his actual dates and whatnot, but more of some things that would kind of be going on in his lifetime. Hesse's grandfather and also his grandmother were missionaries in India. So this is really where where he is getting a lot of the culture and a lot of the history and the things that he knows about Indian traditions is coming from his grandfather. His grandfather is very well read, has a lot of books, has a lot of resources, and Hesse does go to India later on in his life, but at a young age, he's certainly getting influenced by it. His parents live in Germany. His father was born in what would be present-day Russia, which was still part of the German Empire. They are very strict, and the plan for him really the whole way along is that you are going to become a minister. You're going to go to seminary, which then you send him to. That's right away. But that he is going to be a Lutheran minister. So there's a little bit of a conflict between them, where at a young age, Hesse does want to become a writer and explore things a little bit more with a lot of that influence kind of coming from his grandfather. One of the first jobs that Hesse has is working in a bookstore, and that's something that has a pretty big effect and impact kind of on him. But certainly that childhood is rich with Eastern culture, and this is also kind of like the in vogue thing that's starting to happen in the mid-19th century. About 1840s on, you're really getting an explosion of Eastern culture in a little bit more mainstream kind of Western thought, Western philosophy. Thoreau, Emerson with transcendentalism. We're going to be taking a look at a lot of that stuff. So I mentioned that the parents are very strict Lutherans. So the Bible is getting interpreted literally, and so there are things that are getting rejected, such as dancing, sports, those kinds of activities where it's going to be more of a study. So his love for poetry, his love for music, his love for writing, those are going to take a backseat to the religious ideas that they are trying to certainly place upon him. And Hesse does agree with their religious viewpoints, but it's certainly something that ends up being a little bit of a conflict where there's other aspects of life that he does want to explore. When it's all said and done, he would still identify himself as being Lutheran. It's not that he switches into becoming a Hindu or Buddhist or anything like that, but those are influences that he's certainly kind of taking to look at things. But as a person growing up and as an adult, he would view himself still as being a Christian Lutheran. Mentioned that parents want him to become a minister. He wants to pursue his career in writing. He does go to seminary in Wittenberg, but then he ends up kind of leaving and decides that he is going to pursue his career in writing. Doesn't really get the blessing from his parents, but decides, oh well, I'm going to still try to do this anyway, and does end up being pretty successful with it. By 1916, and so he's still fairly young at this point, being born in 1877. This is going to put him at how old? He's 39 years old, almost 40. 39 years old. He his wife at this point, and he has 3 children. His wife is placed in a mental institution for schizophrenia. His son has contracted meningitis. His father has died, and historically, 1916, you also have World War I that is starting to take place. Hess does feel an obligation to serve in World War I. He does enlist in World War I. He is not physically cleared for combat for World War I. He does serve and do more of some clerical work and whatnot with it. But 1916, world kind of comes crashing down for him, where you have all of these things that are taking place. As a result, with all of these, he ends up going into a sanitarium where he's undergoing psychoanalysis. Freud, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung are certainly big people within that psychoanalysis, taking a look at different levels of the mind. You know, talk about different levels of existence. They're taking a look at different levels of the mind, and he really is kind of starting to grasp these concepts. So the idea that you have a conscious, that you have a subconscious, that there's a collective unconscious, the id, the ego, all of those things are ideas that Hess is really trying to explore, take a look at. You blend that with the Eastern culture that he is really interested in, and this is where you kind of start to get a lot of the ideas that are going to be taking shape within Hess, or within Siddhartha in Hess's book. By 1918, 1919 is really when Siddhartha is kind of coming to take the shape for him, and 1922 is ultimately when it is getting published. But if you are taking psychology or whatnot, I would imagine Freud and Jung would be 2 people that there would be a lot of information would be coming that way. But you know, kind of like the idea of 20th century psychoanalysis, these 2 people would be the ones that you'd really be taking a look at. Freud is Austrian, Jung is from Switzerland, I believe. But throughout Europe, they're certainly having some big shifts in the way that we take a look at the mind. Jung says that there are 3 parts of the mind. There's the conscious, there's the unconscious, and there's the collective unconscious. What's the conscious? This is what you know that you think. I mean, you're purposely thinking. You are consciously thinking about it. The unconscious is the part of your mind that has influence, but you don't realize it is influencing you. So unconsciously, Shay is going, she's not making the decision to do it. Morgan's just flat out rebelling, so that's her conscious decision. There's then also the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is, and who in here is the, and it could be, and it could be like a community. You could say it could be because of humankind and whatnot. So, you know, I'm going to ask the question, and you're right. Who's afraid of spiders? Why are you afraid of spiders? And some people, well, I got bit by one when I was like 3 years old, and I hate them ever since then. Others go, I don't know, I just think they're creepy. Why? Because we've basically been trained, as Emily was saying, to assume that we should be afraid of spiders, or we should be afraid of the dark, and things like that. So the collective unconscious is the idea that as a species, as a group, could be something as a family, whatnot, you don't realize that influence is being placed upon you. But as a human race, there are certain ideals and beliefs that we would have. And so a lot of these things can all be seen in Siddhartha through Vasudeva, who's Vasudeva, Shay?
That's your guy.
But what's his name mean?
He's the one who abides in all things.
There you go. So regardless of what levels you are at, Vasudeva is a person who kind of can recognize these things and sees these things and understands how all of this works, that there's more than just one kind of layer or level that you human would be. Govinda mentioned that he kind of gets referenced as being Siddhartha's shadow. You know, this could be the unconscious idea that there's a certain belief that, you know, Siddhartha would have that he kind of carries along with him, but it's not something that he may necessarily know is there at all times if it's that unconscious kind of aspect of his mind. So with his, you know, psychoanalysis that's taking place, with his exposure to Eastern culture, you certainly have a lot of ingredients that would be going into the book. So certainly a short book, but there's a lot of things that would be going on. And then it's not that like in 1962 he died, that's the end of him completely. A lot of stuff does happen in between 1916 and 1962. He does win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1946. His books become very controversial in the 1930s in Germany, when you have Hitler, who, certainly burning a lot of books, banning a lot of ideas, and when you have a person dealing with, different ways of enlightenment and whatnot taking place. So there's a lot of sacred religious texts are getting burned. Hess is becoming less and less popular with the Third Reich. It's not until after he dies that really he kind of has a second wave of influence in the 1960s where that counterculture starts to take place. People like Kesey and whatnot in the 1960s, 1970s, that kind of brings him back up to some significant status. You also are getting these books translated a little bit more so after he passes away as well. So it's more common to find a book of his at, secondhand bookstores, bargain bookstores, as the translations are becoming more and more apparent. So for Monday, part one, which again, this book is like 35 pages. Keep an eye on some things. You got the terminology in your nice little bookmark that you can take a look at if you're kind of getting stuck anywhere. But don't worry about focusing too much on Hindu terminology and things like that. Take more of a look at what Siddhartha is trying to accomplish. When the book starts, he's like 18 years old, so he would be contemporary for you. The kind of things are these issues that he's dealing with, or are these thoughts that he's dealing with, still kind of comparable to something that a 17, 18-year-old could be having in mind, let alone a 38, 39-year-old. Independent reading, remember, tomorrow night. So should you still have a question tomorrow morning during our morning, you can run those things by me. Hypothetical.
Watch fourth period. I'm gonna get a text from this.
Fourth period.